This episode is sponsored by JDAQA Software Testing, your scalable solution for manual, automated, security, and performance testing. Check us out at jdaqa.com. And with that, let's get on with the show.
This is The First Customer, hosted by Jay Agner.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jay Agner. Welcome to the First Customer Podcast. Today, I'm lucky enough to have Patrick Faga with me. Hey, Patrick, how's it going, buddy?
Hey, Jay, how are you?
I am good. It's hot. It's summertime here. Is it hot down there in Virginia?
Oh, yeah. And the smoke just cleared out. We had a few days of that Canadian wildfire haze down here, and it was pretty bad. We had our air quality index up to 170, I think. So nice to be able to see the blue sky again today.
To go outside, right? It's nice. Yeah. A few weeks ago, we were at 500, like the highest it could go. It was crazy. And I was in Buffalo last week, and it was just like, you couldn't see. It was wild. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about FirstWork, which helps kids learn their first words. You're the founder and CEO. You know, I have 5 kids, so obviously that stuck out to me as something. Our little guy, one of them had like speech therapy when he was little, so that actually both of them, I think 2 of my boys had speech therapy at some point. So definitely, kind of rings true to home for me. So let's start from the beginning though. Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C. on the Virginia side. My whole family's around here. So grew up in the Arlington area, if anyone's familiar with that area of town. But yeah, D.C., born and raised, and went off to school in San Diego and then in Philadelphia and found my way back here. So that's where I am now.
So did that have any impact on your entrepreneurial kind of journey along the way? Was there anything that in your childhood or, your family that led to that?
That's a great question. Yeah, there's a little bit. I mean, nobody in my family is directly in entrepreneurial work, but DC is a very productivity focused place. A lot of people working on a lot of really interesting projects. And so got to meet a bunch of folks who are, sort of in all of the different areas that are relevant to entrepreneurship, but there wasn't any direct family tie to entrepreneurship in my life.
Okay. And you went to University of San Diego and then UPenn, and you're kind of doing the behavioral neuro. Like, what put you on that track? Like, what got you going in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came to college with very little idea of what I was going to study. I know a lot of folks come in, with their focus on science or, the social sciences or whatever it might be. But for me, I really had almost no plans when I started. And so like many curious and sort of naive people, I got into philosophy to start with, actually. So I also have a major in philosophy. So I spent my first few years studying philosophy and was interested in all of the big questions that, sort of primarily revolving around why do people do the things that they do and how might we, be able to change those sorts of things so that people could do better things for themselves. And I fairly quickly realized, it was not super quick, it was 2 years, that the answers to the questions that I had weren't necessarily in philosophy, in the philosophy canon. There was some, kind of great direction there and some really wonderful theories, but it's not the applied kind of field that really is required to make an impact in the real world. And while I was in philosophy, I was taking a class on neuroethics, actually. And in that class, I kind of got really fascinated by the brain and the brain's impact on behavior. And that was sort of my jumping off point into the sciences. So got the behavioral neuroscience, really asking some of the same questions. How can we, understand people's behavior? How can we change that behavior so that it can be a little bit more productive to everybody? Which sort of set me off on the path that I'm on today, where I'm behavioral scientists really focused on those big behavioral questions and how we can design the environment so that people can end up behaving in a way that's a little bit more in line with their best interests, as opposed to sort of falling victim to some of the traps that we see in the environment that can end up dictating our behavior.
Is that the class you would take to figure out like why people become serial killers and stuff like that? Like it sounded like I've always wondered like, what the brain part is that makes you go down some crazy path, but is that the kind of stuff you would learn in a class like that?
So in that class, we didn't quite learn that specifically. We did sort of touch on that in the behavioral neuroscience curriculum a little bit, but the sort of interesting question related to that is answered in that class is, or at least addressed in that class, is how do you think about, the ethics of actions perpetrated by people who do have those sort of different neural structures that maybe lead them to maybe not have a choice or be really highly prone to doing things that are destructive to others. And so that was sort of the type of thing we were thinking about there, where, if you have a person with, with some sort of interesting neural profile that's leading them to do things that are unconventional, how do you judge that person? Is it the same as somebody who, is operating on a more traditional basis, or do we treat them differently?
Got it. Okay. So that makes sense. So you left there. And did you go straight into founding your own business? Where did you go after college?
So after college, I graduated in 2020, which, as we all know, is an interesting year to be graduating from school. So At the time, I was interested in doing some lab work or further exploring behavioral sciences. Those were my two areas of interest. And I ended up getting a job in an applied behavioral analysis clinic, which is really where the whole FirstWork story actually starts. So applied behavioral analysis is a really interesting field of behavioral psychology that aims to apply behavioral principles to change environments so that kids can develop skills more efficiently. So it's something that there's, I think, 50 plus years of research on. It's a relatively new field, but it's something that sort of grew out of the work of B.F. Skinner and other folks in the behavioral sciences. And it's something that's incredibly impactful for the autism community because the approaches that are used in applied behavioral analysis work so well with the needs of the kids. So I was working in an applied behavioral analysis clinic for a while, and then I went to grad school. So my initial exposure to autism and the approaches that are successful for that, and really a lot of the core ideas behind FirstWork, were things that I picked up while I was working in this applied behavioral analysis clinic. So did that for a better part of a year during my year between undergraduate and grad school. And then I went off to the University of Pennsylvania, where I continued grappling with some of the ideas and the concepts from applied behavioral analysis, and then ended up creating FirstWork as a result of that.
Wow. You definitely, I think you might be the most recent grad that I've ever interviewed. I didn't realize, I saw that you were fresh out of school, but I didn't realize that fresh out of school. That's cool. But you didn't go, so you went right after that, you kind of learned something that triggered something. What was that trigger that you were like, oh, this is a problem I can solve with a solution?
Yeah. So the thing which I saw when I was in applied behavioral analysis is this really stark discrepancy between the tech availability and the tech applicability in the traditional education space and in special education and kind of, sort of non-typical educational spaces. So, we got the notice in, I believe, February or March that we were going to be moving offline. We were offline for about a week on COVID vacation. And then next thing you know, there's Zoom, there's, protocols for tests, there's all these things that enable everyone to essentially continue what they're doing without very much interruption. And then while I was in the applied behavioral analysis space, I realized that, it was sort of a world of like 1997 tech. There was, not only was there not technology to, deal with these, recent emerging changes, but there really wasn't even great technology to deal with core issues that have been around for the entire time that the field had. So seeing this huge discrepancy between, the amount of tech availability in the traditional education space and in this space was one of those big sort of opening my eyes moments to thinking about, well, what could tech look like in the space and how could it help these kids? And the other sort of complementary insight that I have is that kids with autism and kids in general are, incredibly into their technology. Screen time is a huge part of all of these kids' lives, even with very few exceptions. And it really fit into the broader framework of applied behavioral analysis. So a little bit of context in applied behavioral analysis, what typically you're doing is applying a pedagogy, so a teaching style that works very well with these kids, but you're also applying this kind of secret sauce, the behavioral side of it. And what that is providing motivation for kids to do the work that you're asking them to do. So, even if you have the greatest approach of all time for teaching something, if the child isn't really paying attention and care about what you're doing, obviously you're not going to be seeing great results. And so that's really the magic and the power of applied behavioral analysis is both the approach, but combining it with really potent motivation to promote this learning. And something that we would see very commonly is that if you do a preference assessment of what kids are interested in, screen time is going to come right at the top of the list for almost all kids. And it was something that was being implemented casually as a reinforcer and a motivator to help kids learn, but it wasn't something that was really systematically being applied to help kids build skills. So those two insights, that there wasn't really any great tech and the kids were incredibly motivated by tech and really liked tech-based approaches, were the two things that were really swirling around in the insights from that period of time that had me thinking that if there was a way to essentially replicate some of the processes that were really high fidelity inside of the therapy context, in a digital context, there would be huge potential benefits to the whole ecosystem, because kids are already on their devices, they're already motivated by devices, and kids really benefit from extra learning opportunities. So if there was a way to essentially combine all of these things at the same time, we could have a solution that would allow for parents to help their kids work on skills more efficiently while they're at home and not just when they're in therapy, which is really what FirstWork is all about.
And is that the gamification of some of those things? Is that kind of how you approached it?
Yeah. So essentially in grad school, I was studying a lot of gamification, and that was it's a great interlude there, because thinking about gamification was actually how I came up with the idea behind FirstWork. So in gamification, we're looking for different ways to make an application more interesting by sort of adding those game-like elements. And something that was, something that I felt like was missing from gamification was really being truly actually interesting to people who are doing it. So if you think about a typical gamified experience, something like a Duolingo, that works great if you care about being better than your friends or if you care about high scores. But a lot of the gamification techniques really aren't intrinsically motivating in their own right unless you already have some sort of other interest on often a competitive nature. And in this context, it really wasn't something that was present. And so what I was thinking about was how can you take a step further? How can you provide something that really is truly ubiquitously motivating for just about everybody? And that's when I realized that screen time itself, having access to your device or free access is the thing that people care about, not the specific experiences that have been gamified inside of these applications. So essentially the core concept behind FirstWork is that it's an app that enables you to earn screen time on your favorite applications by doing a little bit of learning work. So instead of having the gamification engine be inside of the learning experience, the gamification engine is essentially gating access to the things that you already care about. So you have that, sort of perfect motivational structure of doing exactly the thing that you wanted to do, not some sort of derivative of that or something related to it, but, you're rewarded with, time on YouTube Kids or whatever it is that you actually really wanted to do, as opposed to something that's a little bit more contrived. And so that's essentially the core idea behind FirstWork, that instead of using gamification techniques that are inside of the application, we use access to all the fun things that you already like to do on your device as the motivation to get kids to do learning lessons inside of our app.
That's brilliant. I love it. Yeah, I went to school to make video games. I realized that industry sucks and went and did some other things, but I think you're dead on that most implementations of gamification are off.
Yeah.
And they're like, let's just add like you said, like a leaderboard, or add like a leveling system, or add whatever. And it's like you don't really care. Like, you use so many apps that you're like, you don't even know what the hell's going on. You're like, I guess I'm a level 6 of whatever now. And
Yeah.
like, you don't even, it's like, because I think Google has it for their reviews thing. Like, I left a review somewhere and like a bunch of people like liked it. And they're like, you're a level 6 reviewer. I'm like, I don't care. Like, who cares about that? It's like so stupid. So it's certainly, misdiagnosed from a design perspective a lot of the time. So how the hell did a guy that's very smart and philosophy and neuroscience and all this, how did you start to make an app? That seems like a Herculean task for a lot of people, especially that have, maybe you have a tech background that you haven't talked about, but like just from your schooling background, you didn't you didn't learn about that stuff. How did you what was your first step in even attacking this problem?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. I don't really have much of a tech background. I took CS 100, so I know a little bit more than nothing. And when I was a kid, I was really interested in tech. So I'm sort of naturally techie in terms of just like using tech all the time. But yeah, I don't have that technical background. So the way that I went about it was the kind of traditional student founder route. So while I was a Penn, I became aware of these incubators and accelerators that they had, where essentially professors from Wharton and other places would come together and provide, these sessions basically to teach aspiring entrepreneurs about all of the core concepts of entrepreneurship, and then also, kind of how you can attack these problems, sort of irrespective of what your specific problem were. So I got started in an incubator called the Venture Initiation Program over at the Venture Lab at the University of Pennsylvania, which really I gave kind of full credit to for helping make this a reality. They have really wonderful programming for people to start thinking about how you can run a business, sort of how you put a team together, how you assess your market, and kind of craft a strategy to start getting feedback, figure out if this is something worth doing, and then start moving down the line as you kind of continue progressing with the idea. So huge shout out to everybody at the Venture Lab. If you're listening, I love you. Today they were a huge help. So on the sort of business side of things, how do you go from an idea to something that you can test to something that you can build? That was something that full credit to them. And then in terms of actually getting it done, full credit has to go to my co-founder, Thaddeus. So Thaddeus is a dear friend of mine from undergraduate at the University of San Diego. He is a computer scientist and has a lot of connections to the autism space. So I was chatting with him about, is this possible? How can you do X, Y, or Z? And his ears peaked up a little bit more than I had expected. And next thing you knew, a few months later, he was on the team and working full time on making it into reality. So it was a combination of the school-based resources, including a little bit of funding from the university, as well as a great network of friends and advisors who I built over time that helped with the product conceptualization and then also creating the product. And then, of course, huge amounts of feedback from the applied behavioral analysis community, which helped us really build all of the features of the app and understand how exactly it needed to be built to work within the confines of their businesses and their clinical practice.
Get a co-founder. Such a cheat code answer.
Yeah.
Get a smart co-founder who does the tech stuff. That's a very smart approach as well. So I'm sensing a theme here. So you seem like you've hit a lot of the right gears so far and you're heading in the right direction. What, if you had to start over tomorrow and everything was clean slated with all the progress you've made so far, what would be step one for you?
So I think step one, which, in terms of the actual approach, I don't think I would change the approach too much. The approach we sort of took was inspired by, again, the Mentor Lab. The common knowledge that a lot of early startup founders here is to build, measure, sell. So, go build something, get some feedback, figure out, what's good and what's not, fix it, and then try to sell that. The approach that we were taught, which I think is really wonderful, is to try to sell, measure, build. So go out and talk to people, pitch an idea until people are like, we're really interested in this. We'll use this. We'll buy this. This makes sense. And then start to measure and then start to build. And so we did take that approach, but I think that if I could do it again, I would do that even more aggressively and be much, much more scrupulous about, that initial conversation. So, the way that we started out was reaching out to a lot of BCBAs who are clinicians in the supply behavioral analysis space and asking them about the product, asking them about their problems and getting feedback. And initially it was sort of a casual process. It was very conversational and, kind of just asking around. But as time went on, I really figured out how to refine that process and, kind of get to the core of the questions that you're trying to ask, ask those questions that people really can say no to, so that you're getting that quick, immediate feedback, about directional things and the needs of the businesses. So I think if I were to do it again, I would really focus on getting an initial mock-up, which was something that took us a little while to get done. It's high fidelity enough that people can really give meaningful feedback. And then, take that to really everybody as quickly as possible. And to, not that we underemphasize that step in the first place, but I think it's impossible to overemphasize that step. So I think that if I were to do anything differently, it would be spending even more time and more energy just talking to, really everybody, and also being focused on all the different levels of the business and the clinical practice where, there's, and I think this is true in every space, there's stakeholders at so many different levels, and you can talk to one group of stakeholders and hear one thing, and then there might be some issue that you didn't know about that is only relevant in other levels of the hierarchy. And so just making sure that you're talking to everybody in the space so that you have that holistic viewpoint and you're not kind of overly biased towards one level of the operation over another would be my kind of general approach.
And that's an awesome answer. How did you identify the right group or the group that you want to go after? Like, what was your criteria? Like, how did you even start to like say, okay, we want to sell this thing. We think we have the solution. Now here's group X that we need to talk to. Was that just from past experience? Did you guys have to go find it? Like, what was the process of identifying the group to go after?
Yeah, so fortunately, I did have experience in the space, having worked in these clinics. So I sort of knew who the different key stakeholders were and who you needed to, to have buy-in from, for any sort of product to get off the ground. So in our case, it's parents have to be interested in the solution, clinicians who are day-to-day on the ground going to be implementing this and sort of mediating the process need to be interested. And then finally, the, sort of business side of things also needs to be aligned. So those are really our three stakeholder groups. And fortunately, I was aware of them to start with. So we started off with the clinical folks because we figured that they would have a lot of really deep insights into the product. And that turned out to be correct, that, those conversations with clinicians were really invaluable for improving the product and, figuring out what features we needed and how it needed to link up with everything else that was already going on. So that was the group of stakeholders that we really needed to understand the best and really deeply dig through their experience and their needs. And then, the other groups as well were critically important to understand, how everything was implemented. So, essentially we already knew who to talk to, and then not an advertisement for LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is an amazing platform. It's, you can go search those keywords, and especially if you have the paid versions, you can, really go find just about anybody you'd like to talk to. So at that point, sort of just, hit the traditional, sort of sales style engine of just reaching out to lots and lots of people and starting those conversations. And that was essentially how we did it.
I mean, when I was like working a 9 to 5, I was like, I never got LinkedIn. I was like, oh, it's just like Facebook for business. Like, I'll just have like a profile. And it's like, but now that I've been running a business for almost a decade. Like, it is hands down.
It's incredible, right?
The free, quote unquote free. I mean, a lot of people have premium and do Sales Navigator and all this other stuff. But like the free information and access you have to people and the automation tools you can use to reach out, it is like unbelievable. And like people talk about how important it is. It is just, ridiculous the amount that you can get. Like, you could run just about any business ever.
Yeah.
It's all right there.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's most incredible about it too, where I can't even really think of another route that's comparable to what you can do on LinkedIn. Like, you can go on Facebook and other platforms where people are, but it's just so well designed for that purpose. People
are annoyed too if you go in the wrong channel. But like, if you go through LinkedIn and you get them, then like everybody's okay. We're here for the same thing. And
Yeah.
it's like, it's a very casual conversation at that point because you're not interrupting somebody's day. You're not doing whatever. So it's like I said, I think, as with everything, there's cycles and there'll be something else that comes along. But right now,
it's definitely
it's king. I don't normally ask this question, but as a young guy, I do want to ask this question. Look, I talk to a lot of people that want to start their own business. I talk to a lot of people who don't start their own business. What do you think you have in you that kind of drove you or made you different, that made you go do this? I mean, it looks like you saw something, you went after it, and you just kept going. What is it about you that maybe differentiates you from somebody who thought about doing an idea and just kind of sat it on the shelf? Like, what gives you that drive and that energy and that motivation to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So I think it's two things, and I think that one of these answers are going to be less what you're looking for, and the other will be more.
I want both of them, man. I've never asked this question before, so none of it will be a disappointment. Go for it.
Yeah. So on one side, and I think this is something that is really important for all entrepreneurs, but especially young entrepreneurs who are taking often a big, big risk and sort of, taking their career in a different direction than they would if they had, kind of gone a more standard route, is opportunity, where I think that it's a fantastic idea to explore entrepreneurial ideas and go through that process of customer discovery and talking to people. But if you don't have the support ecosystem, if you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the co-founders, and you don't have the interest in your product, then, it's not something that I think people should do. And so in my case, I was, incredibly fortunate to be at the University of Pennsylvania, where they have these wonderful resources and had, people in my network who can help me with all of this. And so I think that the sort of non-glamorous answer is that, I think that the opportunity really presented itself in a very salient way for me. And I knew that there was something here and that I had a route to pursue it, which I think is, the secondary component that often people don't consider heavily enough, where, is this something that, you think you could really pull off with your resources and networks? So I think that's one component of it, which I think rightfully stops a lot of people, which is that even if you do have a wonderful idea and maybe there are people interested in something, if you don't have the time or, the expertise or any of really the components that have to go into it, I think often it's actually a good idea for people to, take some time and, set everything up and then go do it if the opportunity is still there. So that's one side of it. And the other side of it is I really enjoy working. I think a lot of younger folks have different priorities than I do. But for me, I've always been very passionate about projects and work and that side of my life. And so it's something where I think where a lot of people see sacrifice and, a change in what they, typically do, like not going out on the weekends and drinking or whatever it might be, to me, that sort of fits a little bit more into my natural life. So it was something that didn't, it didn't have that element of day-to-day sacrifice that I think that some people, kind of have to experience in order to make these things work, where, for me, it was kind of just, what I like to do. Like if I wasn't doing this and working a lot more than a 9 to 5, I'd be doing a 9 to 5 and working on a podcast or, something like that. So I think a lot of it also is just like, are you that kind of person who likes to, stay busy and work on kind of hairy projects and figure stuff out and, comfortable with ambiguity and risk and things like that. And in my case, I've always really liked a big ambiguous project where you're turning over the rocks and figuring out what worms are underneath and things like that. So I think a lot of it is just kind of personality and interest as well, where, some people are, people just have different priorities and interests. And fortunately, in my case, there's kind of a lane for people who like to spend their time the way that I do.
I loved both answers. I mean, the opportunity thing is an interesting one because you have to, number one, you have to be lucky enough to have an opportunity, but, to your other point, like you have to be ready for it and you have to spend the time and put the effort in and like take advantage of that opportunity when it comes to it. It's like, it's pretty straightforward stuff, but like I would argue, there's a lot of opportunities to pass people by.
Yeah.
And they could, and another thing you said too, though, is passion about what you're doing, right? Like I love running a business. Like I love it so much. Like I have the same kind of drive that you do, where it's like, I would be doing this if I'm not with my kids or, I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to list off my 15 different hobbies instead of doing work. But like, if I wasn't doing astrophotography or being a pilot or doing all these different things, like then yes, I'd work 24 hours a day because I love the running of the business part. It's fun for me. It's rewarding. I deliver good service. Like I help, software companies. Like I do this, so I get it earlier. I wish I had dedicated myself earlier than I did, but I mean, it sounds like you did that early on. So you may have a different answer for this next one, which I'm interested to hear. Again, you're a younger guy. I'm going to keep saying that because you're probably the freshest out of the pond that we have. But What are 3 things you do health-wise to kind of keep yourself tuned up, mentally, physically, emotionally, whatever it is? Like, what are your top kind of 3 things you do, or you want to do on a daily basis?
Yeah, no, I love that you asked this question. I've heard some really interesting ones from folks. So I've always been into weightlifting. That's something I, kind of picked up from my family when I was young. And so that's something which I think is, really phenomenal for kind of just keeping you sort of tuned up. And also, it's nice to have a project, especially at the start of life where, you can see that incremental, it's out, inputs and outputs are directly correlated in that space. So, if you eat right and you do your thing, you'll be seeing that progress. So it's nice to have something like that kind of, I think it has mental health benefits as well, on top of the actual mental health benefits, but just, in conjunction with something so heavy, it's nice to have a project which is sort of, very clearly input output oriented. Recently, I've picked up running. I never ran when I was younger. I used to play sports. And so that was always kind of conflated with punishment. But I heard had a really interesting conversation with one of the clinicians who's using FirstWork. And they were talking about their training for a triathlon and how they use these behavioral techniques to work on, essentially increasing their long distance range by keeping their aerobic threshold, kind of keeping in their aerobic threshold while they're running. And it was just a really interesting, approach to exercise where it had this sort of internal biofeedback component. And I was really interested in it because I never really enjoyed running. So that's been something I've been finding really amazing, just like running at a slow pace where you're not really exerting yourself, so you don't, you can go for a long distance, and it almost feels uncomfortably slow. Where you're like, I should be going a little bit faster. But that's been something that's been great, just for kind of improving that cardio health and kind of exploring another element of physicality that I never really tried out very much. And then I like intermittent fasting. That's something else that I don't know if you're familiar with, but
Big fan.
Yeah, big fan. I think I started doing that during college when I sort of had odd schedules with classes and things like that, and never really stopped. And so I wouldn't necessarily advise anyone to do that or not do that. It's definitely a personal decision. You should talk to a doctor or what have you. But
no, Patrick said to do it, and I died. My friend died, and it's Patrick's fault. No, that's a good one. I like that one too. All yours are great, dude. Those are all 3 rock solid answers. The only thing I struggle with the intermittent fasting is strength training and intermittent fasting. Like I never know if I should, you know what I mean? Because you're like, you're supposed to protein intake,
but I don't know if it's true. But I read somewhere that if that you can get good lifts in while you're fasting. But I personally feel that I do it after I eat, where it doesn't feel like a good idea to not eat for a good
right, or eat after. I always think you work out and then if you're still in your fast for 6 hours, aren't you supposed to get some sort of protein intake to feed your muscles as you're there's wrong there. I'm sure somebody has an answer for this. I've tried ChatGPT, I've tried Google. I can't find any definitive answers on it. It's probably because nobody knows anything. Yeah. We're all just making this shit up as we go along. Nobody has an answer. All right, well, not a mystery question because you've listened to the podcast before, so you know the answer to this question. So you're going to probably have a great one. I hope you do. You have no excuse if you don't. What would you do? Non-business related. That's been my new one. Non-business related. What would you do if you couldn't fail?
Yeah, so I love that you asked this question. I have given this some thought, and it's funny. I was hoping I would have a more amazing answer, but I had 2 actually, which I think are big problems that I'd like to solve. One is I think that small modular nuclear reactors are incredible. They're pretty much available already, and so it's even something that's kind of more feasible than if you could do anything. But I think that properly disseminating these small modular nuclear reactors that have pretty low risk of failure, a lot of energy benefits for everyone, and it just seems like a no-brainer to me where burning fossil fuels is just not great for us. And so if we could transition to something where we had all the energy that we needed, but we had de-risked the nuclear catastrophe side of things, I think that would just have massive benefits for everybody. And the other is that would be really interested in solving the food distribution problem where we produce plenty of food. Or I'm not sure about the statistics, so I can't speak to it with any certainty, but I'm fairly confident that we produce about enough food to feed everyone pretty comfortably throughout the world, but it's not getting to all the people who need it. There's huge amounts of food waste in the US and other places. And so if there was a way to, essentially distribute those food resources a little bit more efficiently so that, we weren't wasting all of it and hunger wasn't as much of an issue, that would be something that, I would definitely want to pursue if I couldn't fail.
2 rock solid answers from somebody who had time to think about it. See, there's no pause there. There's no awkward silence. Well, I appreciate the fact that, you're the first one to be ready for it. I've always been fascinated by nuclear power. It's such a weird thing too, right? Because The fact that like all we're doing still is heating water up to spin turbines is still like mind blowing to me. I'm like, I feel like we're still not doing it right. Like we're still like, we're not tapping into something because we're still just doing the same stuff. We're just like using a different thing to heat the water. It's like, how is it not a better form of electricity at this point than just like spinning a turbine as fast as possible by any means? You know, it's like, so anyway, yeah, I love nuclear power. That was like my first technology thing I ever did.
Really?
Yeah, like everybody had their poster and like all this stuff for like I think like 5th or 6th grade. Like, and I made a website on GeoCities, which I'm sure you have no idea what that is, but it's like the original free website host. Like everybody on like it was on the web in like the early 90s, mid 90s was GeoCities and Angel Fire, and like these websites with like these like 45 page long URL that you had to type in. But I did my presentation as a website to my 6th grade teacher on nuclear power.
Nice.
It was like 4 or 5, pages. You clicked, it had like this, of course, like animated background. It was like every 90s website you could probably ever imagine. So I love nuclear power. I think it's a super cool thing. So I love that was your answer. Although I don't know where we put this stuff. Like, do we just like keep burying it in the ground? That seems like not a great idea either.
So I actually worked on a documentary of these small modular nuclear reactors. And one of the really cool things with them is that they can actually use spent uranium as fuel. So we can go, dig up those, big piles of uranium that we have and like reuse those. And then they're largely neutralized through the process. So one of the cool things with it is that it doesn't really have the same waste profile as your kind of traditional, rod-based nuclear reactors where you have these, just kind of, which is admittedly a huge problem, where you essentially just like bury them in a concrete thing and, hope that nobody digs it up ever. But that is one of the cool things with these reactors is they've actually designed around that reality where you can reuse the spent rods and things like that. So it isn't totally perfect, but I do think that it's pretty incredible what's already out there and that it's not, being proliferated yet. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that'll be something we'll be hearing more about.
Now, you've set it into existence, so now you can go make it happen. Patrick, an awesome time, brother. Let's wrap it there. This was a lot of fun. I knew it would be. Where can people find you? Where can people find FirstWork? Like, how do they get in touch?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn/Patrick Faga if you'd like to find me, or you can just search my name. It's fairly unique, so I think I'll come up. Our website for FirstWork is www.firstworkapp.com. If you're interested in our learning solution, please feel free to reach out. As we discussed before, it's essentially an app that allows you to earn screen time by doing a little bit of learning work. So a really great approach for those of us who have kids who are really motivated by device time, particularly if you have a child on the autism spectrum, which is really what our technology is tailored towards. So please come check us out on our website or on LinkedIn, and we'd love to chat with you.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I'm sure people will reach out. Patrick, you're awesome. You're inspirational for a bunch of reasons, but I'm going to lean on the youth aspect. I mean, you didn't wait. You jumped in, and now you got a cool solution to a real problem, and I salute you, brother. Keep up the good work, and next time you're in Philly, please stop by, and I'll do the same thing when I'm down your way. We'll
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that sounds fantastic.
All right, buddy. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I'll talk to you, man. See you, Patrick.
All right.
Thanks, man.